The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are simply that, opinions. All are presumed innocent until proven otherwise in a court of law. Sensitive topics are discussed. Discretion is advised.
I was so frantic that morning and scared to death, not knowing what had happened. And when I made the 911 call, I couldn't even get out the words. And from then on, I don't remember a thing. It was like my brain wiped that whole memory. That was the worst day of my life. I hope that they are remembered for who they are, not what happened to them, because who they are were so beautiful, and they deserve to be remembered in the highest way.
This is Court TV Live. I'm Kelly Craft, along with Ted Rollins, who is joining us live from Boise, Idaho. Ted, nice to see you. And this hour, we are taking a look at the newly released documents in the Idaho student murders case. Ted has them right there, just hours. Yeah, go ahead, Ted.
Yeah, there's a lot here, Kelly. And so if you're watching, this is a little next couple hours, we're just literally going to read through these and pour through them. We looked at them overnight, our team, and we're picking out, there's still many more that we haven't poured through, and we're just looking for the little things that we didn't know, or things that we did know but we didn't have as much detail on. And we're going to, Jack Rice is going to be with us for this next hour. He's up in St. Paul, Minnesota, and it's going to be a little unique this next hour, 2 hours, and but this case has captured so many people's attention, and they're, hey Jack, and these details really are the things that people were clamoring for all during the while the gag order was in place, and now that gag order has been lifted and we're getting things just dripping out. And so again, we've got this stuff, and we want to start. Let's start with the roommates, because you just heard that sound by bumping in. We heard yesterday from Dylan Mortensen and Bethany Funk. Bethany was there, but her statement was read by a friend. And we're going to start right now with an interview that the Moscow Police Department did with Bethany, and it starts basically with her rendition of what happened. She says she woke up after falling asleep, and she heard what she felt was a firecracker go off, and she thought she saw a sparkler going off through a crack under a door. She stated she didn't know what happened, and either Bethany called Dylan or Dylan called Bethany. This is what she told police. And Dylan stated that she thought she had just seen someone dressed in all black in the house. And of course, that was in part of the probable cause, right? So we knew that part of the equation. She saw this guy, it said bushy hairs, but this is more of the interview. Bethany then said that Xana had been wearing all black, so Dylan responded by saying she thought that he had a ski mask on. So they're going back and forth, Dylan and Bethany, and they're obviously concerned, and they would also later say that they were drunk at the time. Bethany said she didn't really know what to say, and what Dylan said. Bethany then admitted both her and Dylan got scared very easily. She went on to, really talk about how the other roommates would make fun of her for getting scared. She even thought maybe one of Ethan's frat brothers could have been playing a joke on her because she was scared easily. And Bethany told Dylan, come down to her room, and Dylan did just that, ran down to her room. Jack and Kelly, this, you think about the moment after the investigators show up, the first responding officers, and they're confronted with these 4 bodies. And then you have these roommates, these hysterical roommates, young college kids. These interviews were done right at that juncture, and these are basically the first these are the first interviews done with these surviving roommates. Jack, what do you take from all of this? Because let's face it, a lot of people said, well, why did they wait to call till the next day at noon? This kind of tells the story, does it not, from their perspective?
No, well, there's no question, Ted. When we realized for lack of a better word, the bedlam of something like this. We need to understand what any crime scene has the potential of being and the impact that it can have on somebody. But let's go much broader than that for a second. Let's realize we're talking about a homicide, a quadruple homicide, and what it means. I think what we're starting to see is a whole series of documents that show the bigger picture. And remember, when we watch these together on the back end of a case, this is after years of effort by police officers and detectives and forensic analysts and doctors and EMTs and everybody else in the room. And then they go to the lawyers. And now we have a prosecution team who is trying to clean something up so they can introduce a clean, simple set of narratives to a jury of 12. But that's not what we have, and that's not what we ever have. And what this highlights, Ted, is that this is a complex, confusing, almost impossible circumstance. So just one simple example of that. We sometimes will see a crime scene and you imagine what a body might look like. And I don't mean to get too graphic, but we have to understand, especially with this kind of a murder, the amount of blood that is present is beyond something that a normal person can even contemplate. Now put somebody who has no experience with this into that mix and realize what it does. This creates a level of not just trauma, but a level of confusion and sometimes odd reactions. And you realize this is what the police have to walk into. They have to parse it out, they have to block it off and protect the crime scene, but they want to get to these victims and these witnesses as fast as they can because it might be high speed. They may need to find something immediately, or it might be a 2 or 3 year process. This is just a smidgen of what we're talking about here.
You know, let's take another look at more of what Bethany Funk told the police. So in this part, she is explaining why she and Dylan did not call for help when they had heard some noises. So Bethany and Dylan, they did not call 911 at the time because Bethany thought Dylan was imagining what she was talking about. And then Bethany stated, both her and Dylan, that they were both still drunk. And Ted, you mentioned that. And so, you know, these are young kids. They're out partying. They're doing what they normally do, having fun. And they also said that they had been groggy. And so, again, the confusion.
Yeah, and keep in mind, this was a football weekend, too. You know, this was a big football game that week, that day.
Yeah.
And, you know, think about a college campus on football Saturday. This is the aftermath. Now they're in bed, at home, and still drunk. And that, to me, is interesting. When you put it into context, yeah, they were second guessing what they thought they might have been hearing and seeing, which makes sense because it's so off the wall.
Yeah.
We also need to remember, we assume sort of on the back end what somebody should have done. Sometimes we see the arguments for conspiracies of various things, and you think, why didn't they do something? Or why I would have done something. Well, that's all of us looking back. Whereas if you're somebody in the circumstances and you hear something upstairs, you might simply say, that's strange, that's weird, or that person's a scaredy cat. Instead of actually saying, this was unusual, and therefore we should go and investigate. We should pick up the phone and call 911. Sometimes what we get here is, rather than a very broad view and scope, it's just a myopic look at something we know very little about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's really easy to always look at these situations and think, I would have done it this way. But when you are in that situation, I mean, you have no idea until you are in a situation like that, which nobody actually will ever probably be in another situation like that, what you would have done.
Yeah. Let's keep going with that. She says they're both drunk and both groggy. Bethany then This is the police officer writing this. Bethany told me prior to hearing the firecracker, she thought she heard Murphy. Murphy's the dog. Remember, that's Kaylee Gonzalez's dog, Murphy, bark. She also heard what she thought was the beer pong table. Again, college kids living in a house, beer pong table moving, and cups falling. It says cops, but they mean cups. The beer pong table was located in the living room, which is above Bethany's room. Bethany stated that she wasn't sure what the sequence of events were for sure, but she knows she heard Murphy bark, the beer pong table, and then the firecracker type noise first before she called Dylan to see if she had heard the same thing. So again, this is the brain fog of the next morning after a horror movie scenario for a college kid that had been, being a college kid the night before. And for cops, let's face it, they're walking into 4 dead bodies in Moscow, Idaho, where, theft and burglary and maybe some DV is their biggest call of the year. And here now we have 4 dead bodies and there's no obvious suspect. Jack, getting actual information out of these kids, you could see how difficult it was because they're in shock.
No, there's no question, Ted. And in the perfect world, when you first heard the cups drop, well, should you have done something? Would we have done something? Then all of a sudden, you hear the firecracker or you hear the dog bark. Is 1 enough? Is 2 enough? Is 3 enough? Now let's add the brain fog into it, right? I mean, these are college students. I recall, Ted, you and I spending a lot of time together talking about this when I'm in Atlanta, when you were working on that documentary. And I think about what it is to be a college student and to be in this space. And nobody sees this coming. Nobody, nowhere sees this coming. And imagine being a college student where you could actually see more than that, hear more than that. And because it's such a, for lack of a better description, a non sequitur, that it comes from nowhere, that there's no way to link it to something logical and say, this is what that is. And so that delay is actually far more reasonable than I think people looking at it from the back end can imagine, because it just makes no sense. There's no way to see this and assume some nefarious act had taken place or 4 nefarious acts had taken place, so you call 911 immediately. And it really helps to explain that delay. But also, right, but it also does one other thing.
It also does is... Jack, don't we all hear noises? Don't we all hear noises from time to time? You're sitting there and you're groggy, sometimes a little hungover, but you're sitting in bed or something, you hear something, and there's one little part of your brain is, there's something bad happened, but you go back to bed, right? Well, you just go back to sleep, and guess what? It was nothing the next morning. That's what they felt, likely.
And if I'm the only one in the house, right? If I'm the only one in the house and I hear that, something's wrong. But I'm not the only one in the house. There's multiple people out there, so you don't know if it's just somebody else who got up also groggy and bumped into the beer pong table. That's the difference, and you just don't know.
Let's go with more from what Bethany Funk told the police. So let's take a look at some of the other documents here. So Bethany told me she tried calling Xana and Maddie at 4:21 and then tried calling Ethan at 4:22. Bethany stated she tried calling Maddie, Kaylee, and Xana several more times once Dylan got into her room. So again, we're taking a look at these newly released documents that were released after Bryan Kohberger was sentenced yesterday. So Jack, that's just another excerpt from some of these documents. So we can talk about that, but also just in the conversation we were having, one of the things that struck me was when those 911 calls were released and we heard the 911 operator saying to the kids, only one person at a time talk. I can't hear all of you. I want only one person at a time to talk. And hearing that for the first time, I remember thinking, oh my gosh, these kids, they had no idea what was going on, and they're all wanting to talk to tell the operator to get there as quickly as possible. It was like I felt so bad for what they were going through, and then somebody of authority telling them, one person at a time talk, only one person at a time.
You realize again the bedlam. I come back to the word, right? And you can't help but hear that. I think about countless 911 calls that I have heard over 30 years as a former prosecutor and as a defense attorney, and what they all mean. And sometimes what you're having to do as a 911 operator is you're having to oddly calm people down. You're actually having to slow them down because they're coming at this phone call at 100 miles an hour. And what you're saying is, you need to slow down, and I need just one of you because I'm trying to do something very specific and intentional. And so you will actually hear aggressive 911 calls, even though they're doing their best to try to fix this. But if we can look back at that last document where he said at 4:22 in the morning, you realize you're starting to see just how deeply these officers were asking questions. So these are follow-ups, right? When you say, tell me what happened, and you're going back saying, at 4:21, I did this. This is how deep these officers are starting to go. And they're going fast because you're going big picture, but you're also going small because you don't know what the important information is when you first step into a crime scene as an officer. It may be the big pieces, it may be the small ones. We don't know if the people who were the victims or the perpetrators are still there. We don't know anything until we start acquiring that information. And these officers have to walk in and start picking all of it as fast as they can.
Let's go ahead and take a quick break, but we're going to continue looking at these documents, and we're going to look at what the documents reveal from one of the first police officers who entered the crime scene and what he saw when he entered Xana's room. That's coming up next.
The Court TV podcast will return.
Trust us, we wanted that to be the case. We've looked for a link, and we have not found one. Not one.
We have never, to this date, found a single connection between him and any of the 4 victims or the 2 surviving roommates.
Welcome back to Court TV Live. Doing a little special programming today. If you're wondering, hey, where's the courtroom drama? Well, the cases that we're covering, Washington, Ali, they're basically dark today. They're doing jury selection or jury instructions. They'll be back at it on Monday morning. And then Florida, Neely, you could stream that. That's Florida case, that sentencing. You could stream that if you like. What we're doing here is we are pouring over these. These are a very small portion of the massive amount of documents that have been now released since the gag order has been lifted in the case against Bryan Kohberger. And we're going through and basically reading them along with you. It's more of this hour. Jack Rice is with us along with Kelly Craft. It's kind of like a Court TV podcast. We're kind of sitting around reading and discussing it because it's so unique. This case is so unique. We know all about it, right? We know what we know from the case for years. Now we know more. So we're sharing the information that we've been given. And Kelly, we're going to dive. We were just last segment, we were talking about the surviving roommates. Now we're going to switch gears and take it from the police perspective, what they saw, what they observed in those initial moments of walking into this house of horrors.
Yeah, I mean, it has been such a big document dump, and we've been looking at these details and reading about how those frenzy moments that were taking place right when law enforcement ended up showing up. So at this point, we're going to focus on Corporal Brett Payne. He was one of the first police officers to enter that crime scene, and this is what he says that he saw when he entered Xana Kernodle's bedroom. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. So there was a large amount of blood on the floor around Kernodle as well. I could see numerous sounds on Kernodle's arms or marks on her
That was
hands.
wounds.
Wounds. Yeah, wounds on her
must have
hands
been,
and
yeah.
face, which appeared to have been caused by an edged weapon. And then just next to her on the west wall was a small white nightstand, and that appeared to have been moved as it was pushed against the wall at an odd angle. There was blood on this nightstand in various locations. So it goes on to say what he saw when he observed wounds on Ethan Chapin as well. So, Jack, again, just going through these documents, talking about the officers responding. So when he further went on, he said that I could not clearly see the wounds to Chapin's head and neck area, but could see a very large amount of blood on the bed, as well as what appeared to be blood spatter on the wall next to Chapin's head and neck. And then he also went on to say, I noticed 2 large cuts to the back of Chapin's legs. The wounds appeared to be deep into the tissue, but were difficult to see due to Ethan's body position. Jack, obviously a very gruesome crime scene to come upon for that first responder.
I think, first of all, about this officer. I mean, I think about these 4 victims, and it's brutal, and it's brutal as I think about their families. But I think about this officer, and I can only say it like this. I recall many years ago being involved in a double homicide, and it was a knife situation, and to be at the crime scene not long thereafter, before it was cleaned up, and those pictures that are written out, those will never do it justice, ever. And the problem is that this officer, to this day, sees them. He remembers the back of his legs. He remembers the wounds to the arms. He remembers what the knife wounds and defensive wounds can look like. He remembers all of this. And they don't leave. They just find a place to rest. And so we have to think of that. But you realize what he also has to do is he also has to now control that. Is that the crime scene? The answer is yes and no, because that's the first room. We have other rooms involved. We have the entire house, and we don't know which one is the important one. So he has to be careful. He has to make sure that if he can save this person, if they're not deceased, how do you save them? The second thing you have to do is control it, because there may be evidence that's being destroyed by him simply by walking in the room, and he knows that too. So he has to back out carefully and then move on to the next victim until he figures out if there's any survivors, and then he has to control it until a sergeant shows up or a supervisor shows up to say, go do this, we're going to control this, and this is your job now. That's what that officer is dealing with to this day.
It's crazy to think back at what they were confronted with. We have roommates may not have woken up, was the 911 caller. There's a concern over, maybe they came rolling in there, all right, college kids, let's go see what's happening, and boom. It's insanity. I want to read some more. This is a supplemental report from Corbin Smith, a narrative about how he arrived to 1122 King Road, the house, in reference to the possible homicide victims. He was there earlier. Nunez was there before him. But this is what he says he saw as he walked in, and it's chilling. He said he entered the residence, went to the second floor. I observed a female wearing a sweatshirt and underwear laying in the middle of the bedroom floor covered in blood. I observed deep lacerations indicated of defensive wounds on the female's hands. The female was surrounded by blood on the floor. I observed a male laying on the bed. The male appeared to have suffered from stab wounds on a laceration to the neck. The male was covered in blood, and the bedding around him was soaked in blood. In the third floor bedroom, I observed 2 females laying in bed, which appeared to have been stabbed to death. The female laying on the left half of the bed, as I looked at it from the doorway, was unrecognizable. Her face completely disfigured, stabbed several times. Jack, this is what you're talking about. This is his writing. This is go back to the office and write your report This is what he's saying. It's unbelievable. Unrecognizable, her face.
You know, again, I want to believe, Ted, Kelly, that and we all say this about these officers, that they're pros, right? And they are. They're pros, but they're also human beings. And they're likely human beings who have never experienced anything like this before. And you're asking them to do something almost superhuman. You're asking them to look at a crime scene, a murder scene, maybe one of the most brutal kinds of murders, because there's really nothing worse than knives, because those are up close and those are personal. And you're asking them to catalog them, to look at this like a machine looks at this. So then you can memorize it all, pack it in your head, go back to the station and write down everything that you remember. You talk about the defensive wounds to the hands. Understand, these aren't just small cuts. That's not what we see in these kinds of cases. We see cuts that go straight to the bone and everything hangs. This is where these officers are, and I'm truly hopeful that they have been able to get help themselves to deal with what that means, because they have to be able to operate. But at the same time, what we're talking about is 2 or 3 years down the road, these officers have to be able to retain it and acquire it. And this is what we teach them. And it bothers me now as I say this. This is what I teach officers, I want you to be the first person in the room, and I want you to grab the jurors by the hands and walk them in and make them feel what you felt. In other words, I want you to retain all of the trauma that you had at the time and that you've acquired and you've held on to for the last 3 years, and I want you to relive it as personally as possible to the point that you can convey it and wrap your arms around the jury and take them inside and make them as brutalized as you have been brutalized. And that is actually what a jury gets to see if the officer is the most effective. And it's nothing short of superhuman.
And Jack,
nothing short.
It's such important teaching, because in this case, defense counsel had been saying just as late as June that they were going to put forth that alternative perpetrator theory, blaming some other people for this. And it's so important for officers to have every single detail. So when you're prosecuting a case and the officers then can go up there and talk about what they saw, what it was like, that they didn't leave any stone unturned. It's so important for those details and to take the jury and to walk them through exactly what these officers were experiencing when they arrived on scene. So let's go ahead and continue to look at these documents, but we are going to get in a quick break first, because next we're going to take a look at some other details of the discovery of that knife sheath. And remember, yesterday during that news conference, law enforcement officers had said they would have been able to find Bryan Kohberger even without this, but it was an extremely important break in the case. Let's take a break.
Now, back to the Court TV podcast.
We do know that another weapon was used on Kaylee. So we don't know what that weapon was, but
they didn't recover it.
Along with the knife was recovered, but Kaylee was not just stabbed. There was other things that happened to Kaylee.
Listening to the Gonsalves family give that news conference outside the Boise courthouse. This was after Bryan Kohberger was sentenced. Welcome back to Court TV, everyone. I'm Kelly Craft, along with Ted Rollins, who is joining us live from Boise, Idaho, and our guest this hour, criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor Jack Rice. So this hour, we're bringing you a look at those newly released documents in the Idaho student murders case. The documents, they're really shedding light. Ted's holding them up. They're shedding light onto what really happened to Kaylee Gonsalves, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, Michael and Ethan Chapin. Hundreds of documents were released by the police department within hours of Kohberger being sentenced to life in prison. So in this next part of the documents...
Hey, Kelly, that soundbite was interesting because the Gonzalez family, they know... They've been briefed, obviously, of the condition of Kaylee. We just found that out. That document that I was reading in the last segment, that's Kaylee, whose face was unrecognizable. So they obviously have been briefed on that, and that is why it makes sense. Because what they were saying yesterday, afterwards, saying there's a second weapon, and that Kaylee had these other injuries. Nobody. We didn't know exactly what they were talking about. Then when you add the document dump into it, you can see from their perspective of what they know in terms of what happened to their daughter. And man, think about, this family has been so strong, and those victim impact statements yesterday, very aggressive towards Kohberger. All right, I get it.
Yeah,
he
absolutely
butchered their daughter.
Ted, in that news conference yesterday, I know that law enforcement, they were asked about this, about another possible weapon. And, but yeah, like you mentioned, the Gonsalveses at that news conference, they were saying that there for certain was one.
Yeah, and the officer said no, that they didn't have evidence of another weapon. I felt like they were maybe towing a line of being, they haven't found any evidence of another weapon. But the condition of her body, the Gonsalveses are convinced that something else was used. I don't, what if some blunt force because of the condition of her face. And we heard the officer didn't even recognize, wasn't sure what he was looking at when he walked into that room.
Yeah, really, really just awful.
It's horrible.
So this next part of the documents we want to take a look at. This is Corporal Brett Payne, and he's detailing what he ended up seeing when he went to that third floor of the house. So what he's saying here is, I entered the bedroom. I could see two females in the single bed in the same room. The bed was situated along the north wall of the bedroom, and both females, later identified as Mogen and Gonsalves, were laying on their backs with their heads toward the east and their feet toward the west, which also was the direction of the only door into the room. Both Gonsalves and Mogen had numerous visible stab wounds and were also covered with blood, a significant amount. He went on to say, I also later noticed what appeared to be a tan leather knife sheath laying on the bed next to Mogen's right side. So, Jack, there's that knife sheath. So important.
It's critical when you realize what this means now. We know that this deputy had already been on the second floor. You can imagine what he is feeling as he walks up those steps. As he walks up the stairs to that third floor and walks into this room and finds two more victims, brutalized. And then to find a piece of evidence. And he has to be almost on automatic pilot at this point. He has to almost be in a space where he's saying, this is my job, this is what I do, this is what I signed up for, this is why I went to the academy. And he's working his way through this, and he has to systematically scan that room. And it would be easy to simply turn away. It would be easy to simply say, this is too much for any one person, I'm gonna go get somebody else. But he doesn't. What he notices immediately is one of the most critical pieces of evidence that actually appears to go beyond this household, to go beyond this room. And that's a critical piece, because sometimes it is about that feeling that says there's something about this piece of evidence, this thing, that doesn't fit this room. Why would two of these college-age girls have that?
If you think about it, when he walks in, and yes, to the point, I mean, he's already has the lenses of investigator, right? And there could be, whoever did this is a homicidal maniac. He's on guard. But then you imagine when he sees that knife sheath, that's a shot of adrenaline. He's like, oh boy, this dude left behind a knife sheath. This is massive. That would, I would assume, send him to a different level of not just observing, looking at the victim condition. Now it's holy blank, we got a knife sheath. Get away. We got to make sure we handle this properly, and this could be the key, right?
It may actually have been the thing that spurred him into focus. Because remember, he's going to have his service revolver, his sidearm is out. And so as he's going up these stairs, it's out. And he walks into that room with it out because he doesn't know what's in that room. He doesn't know if it's one person, nobody, two. Is the perp still there? We don't know that. And when he sees that, this must just say, okay, we may have something here. Now we have to focus. Now we have a piece of evidence that matters. And you get something like that, it changes how he's going to approach this. Now he has to move quickly because he has to figure out what else is in the house. Are there other victims in the house? What do we do next? And he's already calling for backup. That happened immediately already. And so what you have is a call that goes out for something like this. It's every available officer, not just in the beat that would cover this. They come from outside. It could be Moscow police. It could be those outside. It could be State Patrol. It could be anybody else from other jurisdictions. I can tell you I've handled murder cases, and you see people come from everywhere because when they hear about a murder, they want to help. That's what officers do.
Okay, we're going to squeeze in a quick break. Coming up, the newly released documents will reveal what an inmate told police about his opinions of Bryan Kohberger. You're not going to want to miss this.
Two parents face a jury
over the attempted murder of their own daughter. Court TV takes you inside the trial that's torn a family apart.
The attempted honor killing trial. Live coverage today, only on Court TV.
Friday night, the WNBA is on Ion. The Mercury try to contain the Liberty. Then the Wings fly into battle against the Valkyries. Electric. Coverage begins Friday night at 7. Find Ion wherever you watch. Ion, it's on.
You are so beyond human. You're definitely a demon from hell. I truly wish your punishment would be the same death you inflicted on our kids. But I think you will meet some new friends in prison who will be there just to help you. Thumbs up.
Welcome back to Court TV Live. Along with Kelly Craft, who's in our studios, I'm Ted Rollins outside the Ada County Courthouse in Boise, Idaho. This hour, we're going through the Kohberger documents, as we're calling. Basically, the gag order was lifted, and now this is a very small portion of the documents that were released, and they'll be dripping out via the Moscow Police Department and other agencies over the next few weeks and months. And they're all over the place. So, we've been talking about the interviews with the roommates. We talked about the officers when they showed up and what they saw, the condition of the bodies, and then the knife sheath, discovering that. And it's fascinating because you're seeing it through the eyes of the Moscow Police Department and their police reports and how they were compiling this. Well, now we're going to fast forward because, again, these documents are just kind of willy-nilly have been released, and here we are. We're reading them. This is fascinating. This is a document from Corporal Payne, Brett Payne. We heard from him before. And it's talking about after Kohberger's been arrested, there's an inmate in the Ada County Jail that contacts the investigators and said, hey, you guys want to hear what I think about this Bryan Kohberger guy? So they go and they interview him, and it's fascinating what they basically hear from this roommate. Not roommate, I guess the cell is next to Kohberger. They didn't put anybody in there with him. But here's what he said. This is what he told Brett Payne, Corporal Payne. He told me that Kohberger would often question him about his past criminal offenses and why he was in the maximum security wing of the jail. I asked the inmate what he thought of Kohberger's intelligence. The inmate stated Kohberger was the smartest person he had encountered while in confinement. went on to say the inmate told me that Kohberger quickly became annoying because of his habits. He told me Kohberger would wash his hands dozens of times each day and would spend 45 minutes to an hour in the shower. I asked the inmate, this is Payne, if Kohberger slept at night. He told me Kohberger would be awake almost all night and would only take a nap during the day. He said he could hear Kohberger moving around, shuffling all night, which also annoyed him. And then Payne says, I asked the inmate if Kohberger ever lost his temper. He told me that on one occasion, Kohberger was video chatting with his mother, which the inmate said he did for hours each day, while the inmate was watching sports. The inmate yelled out, "You suck," watching the game, whatever he was watching, at one of the players on one of the teams, in which point Kohberger then got up, put his face out of the bars, and aggressively asked if the inmate was talking about him or his mother. Wow. Jack, what do you think of that?
Ted, it's a perfect example when we think about what the police are trying to accomplish. If the question is what evidence can you glean from this? Well, sometimes, especially early on, even after the arrest itself, you're trying to understand who you're dealing with. You're trying to understand the kind of personality type, the intelligence level, maybe his absolute, almost obsessive desire to have everybody around him assume he's the smartest person they've ever met. That is all about how you're trying to understand somebody who you believe murdered 4 people. How does this potentially take you down a different path? If he was all about trying to be brilliant, that was part of his MO, well, then maybe you can use that. Maybe that's something that you can do. Or if he's thin-skinned, or he gets angry quickly, or he seems obsessive compulsive, his washing his hands 45 times a day, that may change how you do the investigation. So this is actually really smart of these investigators, these detectives, to start digging into what it is that people see about him to see if it changes and how they can look at the case differently when they move forward.
Yeah, I mean, Jack, those are some interesting points, because when then you're talking with someone like Kohberger and interviewing them and trying to get more information, you can use some of those things. Like you said, play off of his ego there. He thinks he's maybe the smartest person in the room. You could use that to maybe get some more information.
If you don't mind, let me grab into that space, because that's exactly what I was thinking about. So years ago, and Ted and I, we've talked about this, as Kelly, you and I have as well, I did interrogations for the Central Intelligence Agency. And part of what that was about was trying to understand what made people tick and why. Because the concept amongst some was that, oh, you torture people to get something done. Frankly, that's not really how this works. But what you do is you figure out what drives the people to do the things that you want them to do. For some people, it is actually about stroking their ego. It's actually about figuring out that what they need more than anything else is affirmation. What they need is for somebody to tell them that they're brilliant, or that I'm terribly confused and that you need to help me understand a case like this. And that may have been one of the things that they were trying to do with them.
Yeah, excellent point.
Yeah. And it's interesting, he's interested in the other roommate, the other inmate. He's like, hey, what are you in for, buddy? And he, again, Mr. Criminology, I want to get into your mind. It's a bizarro thing.
Yeah, that's for sure. Okay, coming up, we're going to hear new details about what the surviving victims heard and saw the night their 4 friends were murdered. We're going to have more from those Kohberger documents when we come back. You're watching Court TV Live, your front row seat to justice.
I will call you what you are. Sociopath, psychopath, murderer.
You are so beyond human. You're definitely a demon from hell.
He is a hollow vessel. something less than human.
You're nothing. May you continue to live your life in misery.
This is Court TV Live. I'm Kelly Craft, along with Ted Rollins, who is joining us live from Boise, Idaho. And what we're doing this hour is we are going through the documents that were just released following Bryan Kohberger's sentencing yesterday. And really, these documents, they're shedding new details on the investigation. So dozens of pages of documents, they were released after Bryan Kohberger was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murders of 4 University of Idaho students. So, Ted, we've been looking at these documents and bringing up some of the new details.
Yeah, and it's literally hundreds and hundreds of pages, and we received them via the Moscow police last evening, and we're expecting to get more as the days and months move on, because the sheer volume of discovery in this case, as you can imagine, with 4 murders, and it took a long time to, it took weeks to actually find and arrest the killer. And so it's fascinating. What we're doing is, it's a little different than a normal hour here on Court TV, where we're going into a courtroom and we're watching that drama play out in real time. And again, if you're worried about the Washington Ali case, they're essentially dark today. They're going through jury instructions. They're going to be back at it Monday. So we'll get back into that case with the defense case in Ali, the case in Florida as well. We're streaming that one. But we're going through these documents with you, and we're just pointing out some of the things that we didn't know, and details of things that we did know that are accentuating it. This hour, Robert Hill is going to be with us, along with Philip Dubé, as we move through it. And I want to start this hour. Gentlemen, thanks for being along with us and along with this ride. It's a little different than normal. But I want to start with Mitch Nunez here. He was one of the first Moscow police officers to respond to the crime scene, the house on King Avenue. And he first describes what he sees. And this is another version of another officer talking about going up to what he saw with Kaylee Gonzalez and what he saw going into Maddie Mogan's bedroom. They were both on the bed. He says one female on the left side of her bed in relation to the bedroom door had an extreme amount of lacerations to her face and upper body, which made her unrecognizable. We read that last hour. He also was talking about interviewing witnesses. And you think about this, there was a 911 call made. You remember that 911 call? It's not just the surviving roommates. There's female voices, male voices. And what had happened, they called their friends over to the house on King Road there. And one of the men went in there, and it's fascinating. They talked to this witness, Nunez. He says that they went in, talked to the witnesses, and the witness said, I pointed out the knife to Nunez. This is the other officer. And this is the knife that the witness who responded came over to check on, help the girls out. He said he got a steak knife from the kitchen because he arrived and he saw the female on the bedroom floor covered in blood and didn't know if there was anyone else present in the room. He grabbed the knife for protection. That paints a picture of what that young man went through as he tried to figure out what was going on right before that 911 call was made. And Kelly, that, we've seen these friends speak publicly. I don't know if any of you have watched the documentary that was released on Amazon Prime. They were going through it, and through their eyes, this is one of those roommates that came over, or friends that came over, because the girls were petrified. And imagine this kid. He's like, all right, I'll go check and see what's wrong with, my buddies. And he finds their bodies. He grabs a knife because he doesn't know what he's enduring and what he's about to see. And it's just chilling.
Yeah, I mean, reading a lot of these details is chilling. Gentlemen, I do want to bring you in on this. And Philip, I'm going to start with you. as we're reviewing these documents and getting all of this new information, one of the things that's, Ted mentioned the large amounts of discovery here. That is one of the reasons defense counsel kept asking for a continuance in this case. There are so many details to sift through as defense counsel. Now, the latest attempt to get a continuance was denied by the judge, and then we ended up seeing this plea deal happen. But just these details, there's a lot to sift through.
Yes, but I do believe that as to the guilt phase, it was a fait accompli for Ms. Taylor. I think she was convinced that there was ample evidence to convict him. The real question was, did she have enough going forward for the mitigation phase to spare his life? And that is where I think she needed more time. It is extremely time-consuming, not to mention expensive, to find all the experts you need to review the discovery, review other experts' reports, actually meet with the client, draft a report, turn it over to the prosecution, and give them time to get their own experts to rebut it. It all takes time. It's not something that you can just whip up with the blink of an eye. So I have been there myself, and I understand. And as a practical matter, I've said it many times, Kelly, capital cases can take 5-6 years to work up before they go to trial. Law enforcement did a stunning, spectacular job in working up and solving this case as quickly as they did. And frankly, it's quite unusual when you have this type of homicide for it to be solved so quickly and the person apprehended so quickly. The next issue, though, is working it up for the defense. And I'll be honest with you, I thought it was a little unfair of Judge Hippler to turn her down. What would have been the harm? In the end, this was ultimately what we call a cop case. The cops were still going to be there to prove it up. But nonetheless, it looks like Ann threw in the towel and decided then to hit the prosecution up for some plea negotiations. And it really paid off because in the final analysis, she needed more time for mitigation to spare the client's life. And that's what this plea accomplished.
Yeah, definitely, Philip. And it was interesting to hear about the prosecutor, how it came about, saying that they approached the prosecution. And the first thing that the prosecutor said to defense counsel was, well, is he willing to plead guilty? And she said he's willing to plead guilty to every single charge.
Yes, right. And just so you know, before I even start negotiations with the prosecutor, I make sure the client's even willing to plead. If he's not, we have reputations, we have integrity, and we don't want to strain future relations with the DA's office. So we have to know that our client's serious.
Let's read a little bit more of that interaction with the individual who came over. His name's Hunter Johnson. He was a friend of the kids. In this, he said he came over to the house approximately 11:55, which is right before noon. We know that. That's right before the 911 call. He said he saw the female on the floor in the bedroom and did not see the male on the bed. So he walked in, he sees Xana on the bedroom floor, doesn't see Ethan, but then he does later, he identified as Ethan before he grabs the knife. That's when he grabbed the knife, did Hunter Johnson. He said he entered the bedroom and checked the female's pulse and found none. And then he came out of the room. He did not tell his friends, the girls who were already hysterical, that what he had found. He just said, do not go in there, and called 911. Robert, for people that have been following this case, and the reason we, of course, have been following this case so closely is because it's so scary. These 4 kids did nothing wrong. They were butchered in their sleep. And there's a morbid curiosity to say, who did this? Why did they do it? And so details are things that people are yearning for, and we're getting them in this document dump. What's your overall reaction to, and what do you think those investigators were going through, the roommates, and even prosecutors? Bill Thompson was there day one in that house. You've got 4 dead bodies and no prime suspect.
Well, that's the issue here for the jury. Really, the only issue that they got to take is, did the defendant do it? Now, when the police are involved, and they're on the scene, and once the scene is secured, then their obligation is to try and find out we know what happened. Now, who did this? And then try and gather that and amass that evidence over, as Bill talked about, takes an enormous amount of time to put an investigation like that together. And then once they have a suspect or they have a defendant, then you're fighting over the evidence on that. So I think with respect to what they found here, the question is, do we have enough to connect the dots to convert who did it to the fact that the defendant did it? Because that's all the jury's going to have to decide here on the evidence, is these people are dead. There's no alternatives. Did the state have enough here to produce that the defendant was the one who did this? And in that regard, what I would call the stalking incidents evidence, the pre-crime evidence, there's some suggestion there about this individual. People saw an individual there over a period of time. So even though we don't have motive, and I don't know that we're ever going to get a motive with this individual, there is some chilling aspect to that somehow, for some reason, if it was him that was the one that was seen there, he targeted these people.
Yeah, that was one of the things that was in the documents that were revealed yesterday, that one of the girls saw somebody that looked strange outside, and then the roommates grabbed some golf clubs to kind of protect themselves because they were weirded out by whoever this person was that was staring at them. Now, they haven't said that that's a connection here, but that was something that was revealed in the documents, Philip.
Yeah, and it makes perfect sense, because it sounds like to me that Bryan Kohberger developed some type of parasocial relationship with one or more people in that house. And it went, and I'm assuming that there was some type of pent-up, built-up response to the rejection that was coming from everybody in the house, even though they had no idea that he was even interested in befriending them.
Yesterday. And I think a lot of people believe that, and a lot of reporting early on from sources, et cetera, that Maddie was the target, that he had been maybe rejected at that vegan restaurant where she worked, or there was well, yesterday, the officers that were involved in this, the prosecutors got up and held that press conference here in Idaho and said, no, there is nothing. We don't have any proof that Kohberger had any sort of connection to any one of these four individuals, and they don't know if it was the house he was after, if he thought that this was, he had stalked that out. His phone, of course, had pinged there in the months leading up to it, but they say they didn't find anything. And, when you read another part of these documents, you read through, initially, they're going through the same steps as in any other scenario where there is no prime suspect. In fact, one of the dissertations from one of the officers is talking about when they informed the parents about their loved ones, their kids' death, they talked about zeroing in on boyfriends, and one of them, they said they interviewed mom and dad. They told me they had a great relationship, that he had a great relationship with Maddie. We're talking about Madison's boyfriend. She got along with everyone. She had a strong relationship with her boyfriend who lives in Boise, and they had just gone to Boise to see him. You're seeing in these documents what these investigators were going through in those initial days after the murders. They didn't know who did it. They were going and looking at all of these different leads, including the boyfriends, and they all turned out to have alibis, et cetera, et cetera. But I just wanted to clarify, Philip, at the end of the day, we don't know that he was stalking one or more of those individuals. It may have just been that he saw an opportunity, or he was looking at the house. That's what investigators believe. All right, let's get a break. When we come back, we're going to dive more into these documents. We'll read more of what we're finding as our coverage continues. The Kohberger documents just released. The neighbors, what did they say? That's next.
This is the Court TV Podcast.
Based on details at the scene, we believe this was an isolated, targeted attack on our victims.
He's very quiet, calculated about what he says.
I want to see an innocent man, but I feel like he's just scared to look at me in the eyes.
If you plead guilty or are found guilty, it is up to death and or imprisonment for life. Do you understand?
Yes. Welcome back to Court TV Live. I'm Ted Rollins outside the courthouse in Ada County in Boise, Idaho, along with Kelly Kraft, who's in our Court TV studios. Philip Dubé and Robert Hilla are also joining us for this hour. A little different hour than we're normally used to here at Court TV. Normally we're in a live trial. Right now we're going over the Kohberger documents that have been released by the Moscow Police Department as part of the unveiling and the end of the gag order. They're coming out in drips. Last night there was a significant amount of them uploaded to the website, hundreds and hundreds of pages, and we're literally just going through them for the next hour here and looking at things that stand out to us. We haven't read through all of them yet. There's hundreds and hundreds of pages, but things that so far as our team reads through them are standing out. And we saw yesterday an extraordinary sentencing hearing, and it was kicked off by the two surviving roommates. Bethany Funk had her statement read by her good friend on her behalf, but Dylan Mortensen took the stand, or not took the stand. She addressed the court and Bryan Kohberger, and this was the first time we saw her. This is the girl that was in one of the two girls that survived, and it was extremely emotional. In this document dump, it goes back and it talks about the interview they did with Dylan, and I want to read some from that. It's police officer Mitch Nunez has interviewed roommate Dylan Mortensen about what she heard the night of the murders. Dylan, they use just her first initial as D in this report. So it says, D said she heard Kaylee scream and announce there was someone inside the residence. D said she could hear Kaylee run from the 3rd floor down the stairs to the 2nd floor into the northwest bedroom. Now, this didn't happen. From what we know, Kaylee was in the bed on the 3rd floor. She did not make it down to the 2nd floor, but Dylan didn't know that at the time. This was the report. This is what she told Officer Nunez immediately afterwards. And Philip Dubé, it goes to the inaccuracies that are inherent in any investigation and people's recollection of what they think they saw and what they didn't. And this was the ultimate case of two surviving roommates who just didn't know what they had heard, what they had saw, and the way they reacted. They were under a lot of scrutiny by the public, but this shed some light into where they were mentally. What do you take from the fact that Dylan was so off in terms of what she recollected in the days after the murders?
Well, as a practical matter, I think it was legally irrelevant because we all know in the final analysis where the evidence led the police. But when you have witnesses at the scene who are being interviewed, they're definitely going to be testifying should the case proceed to a guilt phase, and she would have been impeached, and it would have come out that there would have been a night of drinking, that this was a classic party house, that who knows, maybe there was a kegger there, and she was just coming off an all-night bender, and maybe her recollections were a little blurry. But in the final analysis, I think the forensics are what sunk Bryan Kohberger. But what she did establish, though, is that there definitely was an intruder in the home. And who got knifed first, who ran around the house, I think is ultimately irrelevant. I think the only angle that the defense could have tried to pull is that she had a hand in it. But that was obviously ruled out by all the other evidence. And how do we know that? Well, it's evidenced by the plea. And obviously ruled out through her own investigation that, the witness got certain details wrong. And it would have come out on cross-examination that she was incorrect, but in the final analysis, it would have been a bunch of collateral impeachment.
Let's take a look at some other parts of
absolutely.
the documents. In another portion, Corporal Ryan Schneider spoke with residents on King Road, And this was really interesting because they had said that they heard a dog barking in the victim's home the morning of the murders. So here's what one person had to say. So the King Road resident stated at about 0400 hours he heard a barking dog coming from the east of the residence. He believed it was the dog at 1122 King Road, as he thought that was the only dog in the area. He stated the dog sounded like it was outside and was barking for about 45 minutes until he believed that someone must have let him inside at 4:45 a.m. And then when the dog stopped barking, he stated he had a female with him in the bed who also heard the dog barking at this time. So, Robert, there's been some speculation as to, well, maybe the dog knew who this person was that had come into the residence, and so maybe it wasn't barking as much as it should be. I mean, there, of course, were a lot of theories when people started hearing a lot of these details coming out, speculation as to what did that barking mean. What do you take away from that excerpt?
Well, I think fact versus speculation, I think that term was exactly what's at issue here that you just said. You know, what do we know? There was a dog barking. We know the timing of hearing the dog barking. It sounded like it was outside. Then it stopped. There was a conclusion or an opinion drawn by a witness based on what they were hearing that that dog was let in. You know, so what is that evidence really going to help the jury with here in terms of what it's going to show? And basically, it's going to show perhaps that something was going on at about that time, and it's going to help to establish perhaps timing, subject to, as Phil pointed out before, contrary evidence that could call that those facts into question or subject a witness that's talking about it to some impeachment. Although the juries give wide latitude to what witnesses say. I mean, if you're off the mark by on a significant point, yes, that's something that they will look hard at, but they start looking at the lawyer if they're trying to impeach on something that's a minor point or something that's understandably confusing but not really off the mark.
Yeah, I think confusing is exactly what, in those initial hours, the surviving roommates were confused, the friends and family asking questions, but investigators on some level too. They had 4 dead bodies in this house in a town that, frankly, it does not have murders. It has drunken college kids, maybe some theft, domestic violence from time to time, but this is Moscow, Idaho. This doesn't happen, and investigators, too, I think on some level were confused. I want to read some more of a supplemental redacted report that was part of this document dump, and this has to do with the knife sheath and what they did after they found it. This is narration from an officer saying, I learned that the sheath was found inside the, he says, apartment, meaning house, and it was tan in color, had a Marine Corps eagle, globe, and anchor symbol, and the words USMC were located under the EGA K-bar. That's the knife that now we've seen in many times, the example of that knife. And he said that he, as part of his investigation, went to the different stores around to see who was selling it in town. Followed up at the Tri-State Outfitters, Big 5 Sporting Goods, Moscow Building Supplies, Spence Hardware, Walmart. Each one said they didn't sell that type of knife. But he says, while at Walmart, I was speaking with a staff member who said that she told me about 2 or 3 weeks ago, a white college-age man asked for a black ski mask that would cover his face, and they didn't have one. They only had camo ones, and the male just, I guess, got up and walked away. Philip, it speaks, these documents, which are inherent in every case, but in a quadruple homicide, it gives us a sense now of what they were going through. And I said they, the investigators. Yes, they had the knife sheath, but they didn't have that after interviewing families and friends. They didn't have an initial suspect, and this gives an indication of what was going on in terms of going out and following up on every possible lead.
Well, remember, at this point, what they have is a knife sheath. They have not found a retailer yet that sold it to anybody. They may have found somebody that carries it, but they could not identify an actual purchaser for value. I don't think it dawned on the police to even check for online type sales opportunities. Ultimately, they did, and they were led to him. I'm not sure that in that particular region of the United States that shopping around for a ski mask in winter is really all that suspicious. You know, in Southern California, it might be because we're a year-round warm, arid climate, and you would have no need for it unless you happen to be going up to the mountains to be in the snow. But that would be a rarity. Most people would have one laying around already, or you'd buy it up there. But having said that, yes, it is a breadcrumb. When you start stacking each crumb upon crumb, and through this process of accretion, you are led ultimately to the final conclusion. That's how you work up a case. And like I said earlier, I was really heartened and shocked how quickly they worked this up. And I think Bryan Kohberger never thought in a million years that law enforcement in Podunk, Idaho would garner and marshal up enough law enforcement resources to crack this case. I think he thought it was going to be the ideal school or research assignment that he could maybe write up in a paper, in a dissertation, and no one would be any wiser, if you will. And unfortunately, that DNA did him in.
Yeah, it definitely did. Okay, we're going to take another break.
Unfortunately for him, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But
Exactly, Ted. All right, we're going to take a break, but coming up, more details from the Kohberger documents. Now, keep in mind, a lot of these were just being released. About 300 were released yesterday. The judge has told everyone thousands more will be coming in the weeks and months ahead. We're coming right back. More details from those documents. We're going to be talking about a man in a black ski mask. That's this next excerpt we're going to go through.
The Court TV podcast will return.
Detectives arrested 28-year-old Bryan Christopher Kohberger on a warrant for murders of Ethan, Zana, Madison, and Kaylee.
He was stalking them. He was hunting them.
You could tell there was something off about him.
A quadruple homicide in Moscow, Idaho. It's just unheard of.
This is our home. This is our university. This is our community.
These murders have shaken our community, and no arrest will ever bring back these young students.
This was a violation of everything.
You're watching Court TV. I'm Kelly Craft, along with Ted Rollins, who's joining us live from Boise, Idaho, and our guest this hour, trial attorney Robert Hilla, as well as former deputy public defender for LA County, Philip Dubé. So what we're doing this hour, we're taking an in-depth look at those newly released Kohberger documents. In one portion, we hear what surviving roommate Dylan Mortensen told police about what she saw the night of the murder. So this is in regard to that ski mask. So Dylan said that she locked herself in her bedroom and continued to hear a commotion. Then she said she eventually stopped hearing things, and then a struggle she ended up hearing. She heard a male voice say, "You're going to be fine. I'm going to help you." Dylan said she did not recognize this voice. And then she said after a few minutes, she ended up peeking out of her bedroom. And then that's when she saw a male that she described as approximately 6 feet tall, a slim build, a black ski mask. And then this was around the second floor patio area, so the patio door was likely left open as it was found open upon my arrival. So this is some of the things that they were saying in these documents that were just released. Robert, let me bring you in on this. Again, just lots of confusion after this situation. We're reviewing all of these documents, finding out even more details about this case. Due to a court order, we were not able to see all of these documents. So far, hundreds have been released. This one, this excerpt we just reviewed about that ski mask.
Yeah, and this case underscores just, and all these documents, how these enforcement officers wanted to get this right. This community was rocked by this crime, and they wanted to make sure that they got it right. And so there was a very, very careful investigation, and it also underscores how all these little pieces then fit together. What does this evidence show? This evidence is from an eyewitness. What did she witness? Now we have a male. We have a ski mask affiliated or associated with that male. Now we have a time frame. We have some backdrop as to what was going on and who was involved. So this is a critical piece of evidence. It still doesn't tie the defendant to what that witness saw there, but the next bit of the piece of the puzzle, in a case like this, there's always a lot of leads, but a lot of them are false leads. And you don't want to give the defense necessarily an opportunity to point in another direction. You want to make sure that you establish that you got the right person. So I think this starts the process now where they started to get some more bits of evidence and started to connect the dots. And this is the beginning of it.
Yeah, that's a great point. Philip, was such a complex investigation, and if you think back to after the initial headlines of what had happened, there was the period of time in the weeks after the murders where people were saying, these cops in Moscow are Keystone cops. They can't believe they haven't solved this yet. There was this sense that these guys bungled it. They didn't know, they don't know anything. They didn't, but this tells a different story. They were following all kinds of leads to Robert Boyd. A lot of them were dead ends. Most of them were. And at the end of the day, now that we know who was responsible, this wasn't an easy crime to solve, was it?
Well, yes and no. And first of all, I must say, to be fair to the cops, particularly in this case, generally they work in silence. They don't go out on the airwaves every time they get a new case to work up and explain blow by blow, step by step, everything that they're doing. They don't talk about who they're interviewing, which genetic genealogy database they're running a specimen through. They keep it all pretty much quiet. And when they're ready to build a case and bring it to the DA's office and maybe make an apprehension, they do it. And unfortunately, they take a hit from the public. But as I said earlier, this case was solved quickly. I truly mean it. I mean, this crime was in November of 22. He was already in custody early 2023. In a homicide, particularly a 4-count homicide, that's some pretty swift justice, you know? Now, having said that, you know,
but it was police... 6 weeks total, right? I mean, they knew more than the public. And to your point, you never hear the details during an investigation, but we're sort of programmed as citizens. Some big crime happens. Okay, now we're interested who did it, and this did get past that sort of normal period of time, especially given the fact that this was a killer on the loose, and it was in. Behind the scenes, they were developing leads, but Kohberger was not a friend. Kohberger was not a boyfriend. He wasn't even associated with these kids at all. So it was a lengthy-ish process compared to most murders that, let's face it, we cover at Court TV. It's the husband, it's the wife, and they have it down in X, Y, and Z. This was a complicated investigation.
Yes, and it was pretty random if you think about it, you know? I mean, this was clearly what I would call a hedonistic type killing and part of a research assignment, you know, while trying to earn a doctoral degree at that university. But make no mistake about it, the cops are not going to announce publicly everything that they're doing except to try to quell any type of backlash from the public that the case is being investigated thoroughly. And they were. And you got to understand, particularly the forensic evidence, it's not something that you can develop and get a profile on overnight. Labs are backlogged. You've got specimens in a queue waiting to be tested from other cases. But the fact that they were able to get the specimen, get it tested, find no hits and come up with the brilliant idea of running it through investigative genetic genealogy and getting a hit so quickly. I got to tell you, Ted, with all the homicides that I've worked on in my career, this one was very fast.
Yeah, I mean,
yes.
They ended up solving it, and so in the end, I guess that's all that matters. We're going to get into break, guys, but still ahead, we're going to continue to go through these documents. Next, we're going to hear about this timeline of when the roommates returned to the home that night. Stay with us. You're watching Court TV, your front row seat to justice.
Two parents face a jury
over the attempted murder of their own daughter. Court TV takes you inside the trial that's torn a family apart.
The attempted honor killing trial. Live coverage today, only on Court TV.
Tonight, on closing arguments never before seen, police investigative reports in the Idaho student murder case will break down the shocking new details.
Closing arguments with Vinny Politan tonight at 8, 7 Central, only on Court TV.
Quick message from our youngest daughter. Aubrey wanted to say, you may have received A's in high school and college, but you're going to be getting big D's in prison.
You want the truth? Here's the one you'll hate the most. If you hadn't attacked them in their sleep, in the middle of the night, like a pedophile, Kaylee would have kicked your ass. Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome back to Court TV Live. I'm Ted Rollins, live outside the Ada County Courthouse, where yesterday that powerful sentencing hearing took place. And those comments that you just heard from the Gonzalez family, first mom, and then sister, really were something else. And that's what the first applause. There were a couple other people that garnered some applause. That was the first time that people were compelled just to start clapping, and Judge Hippler allowed it. It was extraordinary, that's for sure. Today we're going through these documents that were released overnight by the Moscow Police Department, part of the redacted version of all of the discovery that's going to be eventually released to the public. This is the first batch, if you will. We're going through them, sort of just reading and picking out details that we didn't know beforehand, that make some things that we did know make more sense and provide more detail to these horrific crimes that captured the country's attention. Kelly Craft is co-anchoring the hour with us, and we have Kelly, a unique opportunity to look into the investigation itself through these documents.
Yeah, we do, Ted. And, I understand that a lot of people have a hard time hearing a lot of these details. This was a horrific situation. And, when you're practicing law and you have to look through all these documents and all these details, and then you get to see this release, it really just gives you insight into the investigation, how things came about, and they're released to the public. And so what we're doing here is just shedding some light on some of the details that are in these documents that anyone in the public can go out and see, and it just gives us an opportunity to discuss what's been going on. And for instance, one of the parts that we're taking a look at is the police kind of highlighting how the investigators were chasing down really every lead, the mayhem after this horrific situation, and they were really trying to retrace the steps of the 4 victims. So investigators reached out to the owner of a club. This was called the Corner Club. That was the last place that Maddie and Kaylee had gone before returning home. And in the document, they said that we determined that Gonsalves and Mogan arrived at that club around 2200 hours. They came in a Prius, or at least something like a Prius, and there was one other friend, an unidentified female, along with them. And then that vehicle was determined to be an Uber vehicle, and then that driver was later identified. Gonsalves and Mogan were mingling around the bar, but spent most of their time in the front, along the bar, next to the left end as you face the bar. They ended up making occasional trips to the restroom and speak to several people as they were mingling. Then at 12:22 a.m., Kaylee paid her bar tab, and she used her credit card, which consisted of what she had to drink that night, and then the owner provided a copy of that receipt as well. And Philip, let me just start with you here. Taking a look at these details and replaying them and discussing them, I know it's not easy to hear for a lot of people, and details of murder scenes and stabbings are horrific, but these have been released to the public, and so what we're doing here is just reviewing them. Just kind of talk about that situation in general. Obviously, this stuff is hard to hear for a lot of people, including us when we review these documents.
Well, remember, all of this would have been presented at a jury trial as if it were a public hearing. And right now, what we are seeing in lieu of an actual trial is just under their sunshine laws, presentment of all the evidence that would have been presented to a jury. So in a way, it really is public record. And the state of Idaho is one of the many that believes in transparency, particularly in criminal prosecutions. And unfortunately, you start getting into some harrowing, traumatic, grisly details where, after which people who did read up on it might actually be a little sorry that they did. Imagine being the court staff having to deal with this. Imagine being the court clerk, the judicial assistant to the judge, having to put exhibit tabs on all this, look at the photos, look at the autopsy stuff. They take this secondary trauma home. Jurors do the same thing. Sometimes they never, ever recover or get over what they have seen in open court in a criminal case. And by the way, attorneys are the same way. I noticed in the beginning of my career, whenever they would, post gory crime scene photos on the Elmo for the entire courtroom to see, I would actually kind of look away. I personally couldn't even look at it myself. I didn't have a stomach for it. Now, gradually you get over it. Other people that have a hard time with it too are beginners in the coroner's office. They're not accustomed in the very beginning to seeing dead bodies being brought in, being put in a refrigerator, and then going into the autopsy room to be put on the table. But in the final analysis, the cops who work up homicides are very accustomed to this. In fact, they're usually present in the autopsy room during the coroner's visual and surgical examination of the decedent. So after a while, I hate to say it, they kind of get impervious to it. And if they can't, well, the remedy is they need a new assignment, or they can go out on workers' comp to try to deal with the trauma that's been inflicted. But yes, it is a tough area to work in, but gradually you learn to overcome it. Why? Because in the end, you're in the pursuit of justice. And hopefully in the final analysis, you have apprehended the right person who has inflicted all this trauma, not just on the victims' families, but everybody involved in the investigation as well.
Robert Heller, we have to take a break, but quickly, why are so many people so focused in on this case? What is it that intrigues us?
Well, it can't help but touch everybody. I mean, anybody that's a parent, anybody that's a brother or sister, anybody that has children. Something that happens like this is horrific, as we said, and they look at it as being done by a monster. And I think in some respects, there's still no answers here in terms of why. And that's a question maybe we'll never get the answer to.
Robert Hilla, Philip Dubé, Ted, thanks so much for helping us review all of these documents. Now, coming up, we're going to continue looking at some more of these documents that have just been released in the Bryan Kohberger case.
Now, back to the Court TV podcast.
He is a hollow vessel, something less than human. He may have taken so much from me, but he will never get to take my voice.
You may have received A's in high school and college, but you're going to be getting big D's in prison.
If you hadn't attacked them in their sleep, in the middle of the night, like a pedophile, Kaylee would have kicked your ass.
All right, Mr. Kohberger, you have an opportunity to make a statement if you wish to. I take it you are declining.
I respectfully decline.
Welcome back to Court TV Live. I'm Judge Ashley Wilcott, of course, honored to be with you today. We begin this hour in Idaho, where documents released following Bryan Kohberger's sentencing hearing yesterday are shedding new light on the confessed killer. Dozens, hundreds of pages of documents were released Wednesday night after Bryan Kohberger was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murders of 4 University of Idaho students. Ethan Chapin, Zana Kernodle, Madison Mogan, and Kaylee Consalves were all found brutally stabbed to death in their off-campus home in November of 2022. We will take an in-depth look at those newly released documents, giving us all kinds of information. That will be starting next hour. But for now, we want to get you caught up on some of the emotional victim impact statements you may have missed yesterday, along with what the judge had to say to Kohberger before he sentenced him. Take a listen.
I was so frantic that morning and scared to death, not knowing what had happened. And when I made the 911 call, I couldn't even get out the words. And from then on, I don't remember a thing. It was like my brain wiped that whole memory. That was the worst day of my life. And I know it always will be. While I was still in shock, trying to process the fact that my friends were truly gone, I had been attacked by the public. I was grieving, numb, and unsure of what had happened was even real. And at the same time, I was getting flooded with death threats and hateful messages from people who did not know me at all or know the dynamic of our friendship. Social media made it so much worse, and strangers made up stories to entertain themselves. The media harassed not just me, but also my family. People showed up at our house. They called my phone, my parents' phones, other family members' phones, and we were chased while I was still trying to survive emotionally and grieve the loss of my friends. I hated and still hate that they are gone, but for some reason, I am still here and I got to live. I still think about this every day. Why me? Why did I get to live and not them? For the longest time, I could not even look at their families without feeling sick with guilt. I did not know what to say or what to do. I was terrified that my presence just made their pain worse, and I was still here when their kid, their siblings and their friends, their loved ones should have been here instead. After everything happened, I was afraid to go into my own backyard or alone in my house. I was scared that the person who did this would come for me next. I made my parents close all the blinds during the day so no one could see me even in the slightest chance. I barely left the house, and when I did, I made sure I was never alone. I slept in my parents' room for almost a year. I made them double lock every door, set an alarm, and still check everywhere in the room just in case someone was hiding. And I still check my room every night before, and I double lock it. I have not slept through a single night since this happened.
What happened that night changed everything. Because of him, 4 beautiful, genuine, compassionate people were taken from this world for no reason. He didn't just take their lives. He took the light that carried it into every room. He took away how they made everyone feel safe, loved, and full of joy. He took away the ability for me to tell them that I love them and that I'm so proud of them. He took away who they were becoming and the futures they were going to have. He took away birthdays, graduations, celebrations, and all the memories that we were supposed to make. All of it is gone. And all the people who loved them are just left to carry that weight forever. He didn't just take them from the world. He took them from me, my friends, my people who felt like my home, the people I looked up to and adored more than anyone. He took away my ability to trust the world around me. What he did shattered me in places I didn't know could break. I was barely 19 when he did this. We had just celebrated my birthday at the end of September. I should have been figuring out who I was. I should have been having the college experience and starting to establish my future. Instead, I was forced to learn how to survive the unimaginable. I couldn't be alone. I had to sleep in my mom's bed because I was too terrified to close my eyes. Terrified that if I blinked, someone might be there. I made escape plans everywhere I went. If something happens, how do I get out? What can I use to defend myself? Who can help? Then there are the panic attacks. The kind that slam into me like a tsunami out of nowhere. I can't breathe. I can't think. I can't stop shaking. All I can do is scream because the emotional pain and the grief is too much to handle. My chest feels like it's caving in. Sometimes I drop to the floor with my heart racing, convinced something is very wrong. It's far beyond anxiety. It's my body reliving everything over and over again. My nervous system never got the message that it is over, and it won't let me forget what he did to them. People call me strong. They say I'm a survivor, but they don't see what my new reality looks like. They don't see the panic attacks, the hypervigilance, the exhaustion, the way I scan every room I enter, the way I flinch at sudden sounds. They don't know how heavy it is to carry so much pain and still be expected to keep going, and that's because of him. He stole parts of me I may never get back. He took the version of me who didn't constantly ask, what if it happens again? What if next time I don't survive? He may have shattered parts of me, but I'm still putting myself back together. Piece by piece, I'm learning how to live in this new version of life. It is not easy. It hurts, but I'm still trying. Still trying, and I'm not trying just for me. I'm trying for them, my friends. About a year ago, I had a dream about them. I got to say goodbye. I told them I won't be able to see you again, so I need to tell you goodbye. They all kept asking why, and all I could say was, I can't tell you, but I have to. When I woke up, I felt shattered and heartbroken, but also strangely grateful. Like maybe in some way that dream gave us the goodbye we never got. Still, no dream can replace them, and no goodbye will ever feel finished. He is a hollow vessel, something less than human. A body without empathy, without remorse. He chose destruction. He chose evil. He feels nothing. He tried to take everything from me. My friends, my safety, my identity, my future. He took their lives, but I will continue trying to be like them, to make them proud. Living is how I honor them. Speaking today is to help me find some sort of justice for them. And I will never let him take that from me. He may have taken so much from me, but he will never get to take my voice. He will never take the memories I had with them. He will never erase the love we shared, the laughs we had, or the way they made me feel seen and whole. Those things are mine. They are sacred, and he will never touch them. I get to feel sadness. I get to feel rage. I get to feel joy even when it's hard. I get to feel love even when it hurts. I get to live. And while I will still live with this pain, at least I get to live my life. He will stay here, empty, forgotten, and powerless.
In my view, the time has now come to end Mr. Kohberger's 15 minutes of fame. It's time that he be consigned to the ignominy and isolation of perpetual incarceration. I know there has been concern about him collaborating on books or movies or other media projects, and I truly hope that someone does not stoop to affording him this spotlight that he desires in the name of clicks, royalties, or profits. While criminal behavioralists should study him away from the spotlight in an attempt to prevent other would-be killers from acting on their worst impulses, there should be no need for that to spill over into the public eye. The great Idaho jurist Edward Lodge was known for trying to find something positive about every person he ever sentenced. And with over a half a century as a trial judge, that was a lot of people. This was often challenging, and I recall in one case he said that the best he could come up with was the defendant had good penmanship. Truth be told, I'm unable to come up with anything redeeming about Mr. Kohberger because his grotesque acts of evil have buried and hidden anything that might have been good or intrinsically human about him. His actions have made him the worst of the worst. Even in pleading guilty, his giving nothing hinting of remorse or redemption, nothing suggesting even a recognition or understanding, let alone regret for the pain that he has caused. And therefore, I will not attempt to speak about him further, other than to simply sentence him so that he is forever removed from civilized society. And accordingly, based upon his conduct and based upon the record before this court, recognizing the standards that govern this court's sentencing decisions as set forth in State v. Toohill, I hereby sentence Mr. Kohberger as follows. On count 1, burglary, 10 years fixed, 0 years indeterminate. I also impose a fine of $50,000. Count 2, first-degree murder of Madison Mogan. I sentence the defendant to a fixed term of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, a fine of $50,000, and a civil penalty of $5,000 payable to the family of the victim. On count 3, for first-degree murder of Kaylee Gonsalves, I sentence the defendant to a fixed term of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, a fine of $50,000, and a civil penalty of $5,000 payable to the victim of the family, or to the family of the victim, pardon me. On count 4, for the first-degree murder of Xana Kernodle, I sentence the defendant to a fixed term of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, a fine of $50,000, and a civil penalty of $5,000 payable to the family of the victim. On count 5, for the first-degree murder of Ethan Chapin, I sentence the defendant to a fixed term of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, a fine of $50,000, and a civil penalty of $5,000 payable to the family of the victim. The sentences on counts 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 shall run consecutively to one another.
I'd like to welcome trial lawyer Michelle Thomas. Michelle, thank you as always for joining us. A big day yesterday in court. Now that he's sentenced, he's never getting out of jail, but also obviously a hard day. The emotions, all of the things that people may not realize victims go through after experiencing something like this. Dylan speaking about it, as well as Bethany as it was read by Emily. So hard to listen to. Here's my question for you. A lot of people in social media has indicated, and even Trump tweeted about demanding to know that he hoped the judge would make this person, Bryan Kohberger, tell everyone why he did it. But at the end of the day, you can't force him to talk. You can't make him say why he did it. He did choose not to speak. In addition to that, the judge pointed out he shows no remorse. Will we ever potentially know why he did this?
Yeah, good afternoon, Judge Ashley. This was one of the most gut-wrenchingly painful sentencing hearings we've, I think, seen or had to endure on Court TV. It's up there. Listening to the survivors, their stories, certainly the family stories, it's really hard for the average or typical person to comprehend how Bryan Kohberger could have sat there with zero remorse. It was like nothing the victims' families were saying penetrated his soul. And so it's really challenging, I think, to even endure this. That being said, there is nothing that the court could have said or done to legally to force him to tell why. And that is the overarching, the unanswered question. That's the big question these victims' families needed to know is why? Why this house? Why these four? Why would you, how could you even conceive of such a heinous crime and for a quadruple murder? But I think the judge also hit the nail on the head when he said there's really nothing that he could have said to justify, explain, help us to understand how he could have committed this heinous crime. So it is, unfortunately, the family's going to have to go through a lot of trauma, healing and therapy and years of trying to overcome this, but without that answered question of why.
Right, and I agree with the judge. Number one, you can't make him speak. To your point, no judge, I was a judge, I can't make someone speak. I can't force a defendant, a convicted felon in this case, say why he committed these acts. But also, even if you could, would you really believe what they said? Because if they don't want to tell you and then you make them tell you, who knows what lies they're going to make up. So at the end of the day, we may never know why. I do like that the judge referenced criminal behavioralists should study him. And I think that that was a very wise thing. I think that's accurate. Now, Dylan, again, one of the two surviving victims inside that house, her bravery to get up there and read this statement, all of these victims, and to tell the court how it's affected her. And I think what really stood out to me is the fact that your home is supposed to be your safe place. You should never have to worry about being safe in your own home. And as a result of this person violating that safety, she describes it as having panic attacks, sleeping in her own mother's room, and that he took away the feeling safe and loved, that she could not be alone, that she now has escape plans everywhere she goes to know how to get out. It's that forever affects not just her, but her family. You can imagine her mother wanting to hold her and heal her and knowing that she really cannot because of what Dylan and the others went through at the hands of this one person.
Yeah, her testimony, her victim impact statement was really compelling, and no 19-year-old, 20-year-old college student should have to endure this and then for the rest of their lives forever be scarred and marred because of what this person did. It was compelling to hear her explain how she will be forever impacted. It will certainly require a lot of years of therapy and probably, spiritual outreach and so forth. But at the same time, it was almost concerning that she, it's a fine line between empowering this monster defendant who committed these heinous crimes and almost giving him yet another victory and knowing, okay, he was able to continue to terrorize even more people and have even more victims. And so it was really a fine line there, but I think that it was empowering for her to be able to convey what he did to her, though, like I said earlier, it was as if nothing was penetrating him. He just sat there stone-faced with no remorse whatsoever, and that was really painful to watch.
Very painful to watch. To me, it said, okay, we've got a whole different sociopathy going on here, something less than human, as Dylan did describe it. And I do want to mention, next block, we are going to have new details.
This podcast is a production of Court TV. Go to CourtTV.com for more content, trials on demand, and to find out how to watch Court TV in your area.